Few fossils in the history of human evolution carry the weight, drama, and scientific influence of Ferrassie Man. Discovered in the limestone hills of southwestern France more than a century ago, this Neanderthal skeleton has become one of the most iconic and revealing human fossils ever found. It has been studied, reinterpreted, criticized, defended, and rediscovered again and again as scientific techniques advanced. And today, more than 100 years after its excavation, new research continues to reinforce its importance. Recent radiometric dating has placed the individual between the 42,600 and 39,800 years ago, meaning that Ferrassie Man lived at one of the most turbulent moments in human prehistory. This was the final age of the Neanderthals, when modern humans were spreading across Europe and new hybrid cultures were appearing in the archaeological record. The skeleton, therefore, stands directly at the crossroads of two human worlds. It is also the largest-brained Neanderthal ever discovered in Europe, and perhaps most importantly, it lies at the center of one of the oldest debates in paleoanthropology, the question of whether Neanderthals and modern humans were separate species, or closely related populations that mixed and merged. Ironically, the man whose work helped launch that debate, the French paleontologist Marcellin Boule, has often been remembered for something he never actually did. For decades, he was blamed for creating the famous image of the stooped, brutish Neanderthal. But history tells a different story. The discovery of Ferrassie began in 1909 in the Vézère Valley of southwestern France, a region that would become one of the richest Ice Age archaeological landscapes on Earth. The site itself, Ferrassie, is a rock shelter overlooking a fertile valley that during the Ice Age was a mosaic of steppe, woodland and river plains. When archaeologists excavated the site, they uncovered something extraordinary, not just a single skeleton, but a Neanderthal cemetery. Over time, the site yielded the remains of 7 Neanderthal individuals, including adults, children and infants. The burials were arranged in ways that strongly suggested intentional placement. Bodies appeared to have been placed in pits and covered. Some individuals lay on prepared surfaces. At the center of this cemetery was the skeleton known as Ferrassie Man, an adult male whose bones were remarkably complete. His skull was massive and beautifully preserved. His brow ridges were powerful, arching like stone bridges above the eye sockets. His face projected forward, but not grotesquely so, rather in the characteristic Neanderthal pattern of mid-facial expansion. But what stunned researchers most was his brain size. The cranial capacity of Ferrassie Man was about 1,660 cubic centimeters, making it one of the largest brains ever recorded among fossil humans, larger than the modern human average. This alone challenged early assumptions about Neanderthals. At a time when scientists still imagined a crude, half-ape creature, Ferrassie presented something far more complicated. A human, with a brain at least as large as our own. When Marcellin Boule analyzed the skeleton in the early 20th century, he produced one of the first comprehensive anatomical descriptions of a Neanderthal. His monographs on the fossil became foundational texts in paleoanthropology. Ferrassie was not merely a skeleton with a large brain. In life, he must have been an extraordinarily powerful man. Every bone in his body bears the signature of immense physical strength. The muscle attachment points on his arms, shoulders and legs are thick and rugged, the places where tendons once anchored swollen like knotted rope. His humerus and femur are dense and heavily built, indicating a body accustomed to constant strain, pulling, thrusting spears, carrying carcasses, and wrestling with the brutal demands of Ice Age survival. His chest was broad and deep, his shoulders wide, and his forearms likely thick with muscle. This was the physique of a man built, not for comfort, but for relentless physical labor and violent hunting encounters with animals far larger than himself. Given his advanced age for a Neanderthal and the respect implied by burial within the Ferrassie shelter, it is very likely he held an important role within his group. Among the last generations of Neanderthals living in southwestern Europe around 42,000 years ago, he may well have been a senior figure, an experienced hunter, whose memory held decades of knowledge about migration routes, seasons, predators, and survival strategies. In small Ice Age clans where wisdom and physical prowess determined life or death, such men often became leaders. Ferrassie Man may therefore represent not just an individual Neanderthal, but the kind of dominant elder who guided one of the final Neanderthal communities through the dangerous closing chapters of their existence. Boole did note that the skeleton showed several features that differed from modern humans. The spine appeared curved differently. The posture seemed slightly forward-leaning. The pelvis and legs were robust and built for powerful movement. But Boole never actually claimed that Neanderthals were ape-like creatures dragging their knuckles across the ground. His descriptions were far more nuanced than the caricature that later emerged in popular media. The famous stooped caveman image that dominated textbooks and museum exhibits for decades was largely the work of artists, not Boole himself. Illustrators exaggerated certain anatomical traits and transformed scientific interpretation into a dramatic visual stereotype. In fact, Boole himself recognized that Neanderthals were fully human in many respects. Most remarkably, he even predicted the possibility of interbreeding between Neanderthals and modern humans. At the time, this was an extremely controversial idea. Early 20th century anthropology was dominated by strict species divisions. Many researchers believed Neanderthals represented a completely separate evolutionary branch with no connection to modern people. Boole was more cautious. He recognized that the anatomical differences between Neanderthals and modern humans were significant, but not absolute. The possibility that the two populations could mix was very real. A century later, genetics would prove him correct. Modern DNA research has shown that people outside Africa carry between 1 and 3% Neanderthal DNA, confirming that interbreeding occurred multiple times across Eurasia. Boole had anticipated the possibility decades before anyone could test it. The importance of Ferrassie has only grown with time. Modern reanalysis using improved dating techniques has pushed the age of the skeleton into the critical period, around 41,200 years ago. This places the individual close to the final phase of Neanderthal history in Western Europe. At this time, the archaeological record shows a fascinating cultural transition. Across France and northern Spain, archaeologists find stone tools belonging to the Châtelperronian culture. These toolkits combine traditional Neanderthal technology with features typically associated with modern humans. The blades are longer, the tools are more refined, bone tools and ornaments appear. For decades, scientists debated who created this culture. Were Neanderthals copying modern humans? Or were these artifacts made by early modern humans themselves? Today, the evidence increasingly suggests something more complicated. Neanderthals were still present in the region when the Châtelperronian industry emerged. Some sites clearly associate Neanderthal remains with these advanced tools. This suggests that Neanderthals were capable of cultural innovation and perhaps interaction with modern human groups. Ferrassie Man therefore lived at precisely the moment when these interactions were unfolding. His world was changing rapidly. Modern humans were spreading into Europe, Neanderthal populations were shrinking, and cultural exchange between the two groups may have been occurring across landscapes like southwestern France. The burial itself adds another dimension to the story. Ferrassie is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that Neanderthals practiced intentional burial. The skeleton was found lying in a shallow pit, positioned deliberately. Nearby, individuals, including children, also appear to have been buried. These burials suggest a society capable of complex social behavior. Someone dug those pits, someone placed the bodies, someone remembered the dead. The idea that Neanderthals possessed emotional or symbolic behavior was once fiercely debated. Today, it is widely accepted. Evidence from multiple sites shows that Neanderthals buried their dead, used pigments, collected unusual objects, and possibly created ornaments. Ferrassie played a major role in establishing that picture. The skeleton itself also reveals the harsh realities of Neanderthal life. Ferrassie was an older individual for the time, probably around 40 to 50 years old when he died. His bones show signs of arthritis and wear from a lifetime of physical strain. The joints of his limbs are thick and powerful, indicating a body built for strength rather than endurance. He would have lived in a world dominated by Ice Age predators. Cave lions, hyenas, wolves and bears roamed the landscape. Neanderthals hunted massive herbivores including bison, horses and reindeer. Survival required cooperation, strength and skill. His large brain would have been essential for navigating this environment, planning hunts, remembering seasonal movements of animals, maintaining social relationships within small tribal groups. The brain size of Ferrassie Man reminds us that Neanderthals were not simple creatures. Their cognitive abilities were likely comparable to our own in many respects. Their extinction was not the result of stupidity. It was the result of complex demographic and environmental pressures during a rapidly changing world. In recent years, Ferrassie has once again moved to the center of scientific debate. New excavations and reanalysis of the burial layers suggest that the skeleton was intentionally placed and carefully protected. Researchers have examined sediment layers, bone orientation, and surrounding artifacts to determine whether natural processes or deliberate burial produced the arrangement. The evidence increasingly supports the latter. This means that more than 40,000 years ago, a group of Neanderthals gathered in a rock shelter in what is now France. They dug a grave. They placed a respected elder inside, and they covered him with earth. That moment connects us across an enormous gulf of time, because the act itself is unmistakably human. In many ways, Ferrassie Man represents the peak of Neanderthal evolution. His brain size was immense. His body was powerful and resilient. His society practiced burial rituals and maintained long-term habitation sites. And his lifetime coincided with one of the most dynamic cultural periods in prehistory. Rather than being a primitive relic, Ferrassie reveals a population that was sophisticated, intelligent, and deeply adapted to Ice Age Europe. The fossil therefore stands as one of the most important individuals ever discovered in paleoanthropology. Not because he was primitive, but because he forces us to rethink what it meant to be human. And perhaps the final irony lies in the legacy of Marcelin Boule. For decades he was remembered as the man who turned Neanderthals into hunched cavemen, but modern scholarship has gradually corrected that myth. Boule carefully studied Ferrassie and other Neanderthal remains. He recognized their differences, but he also recognized their humanity. His suggestion that Neanderthals and modern humans might have mixed was astonishingly prescient. In a sense, Boule saw the truth before the rest of the scientific world caught up. Ferrassie therefore represents two revolutions at once, one in the deep past, when Neanderthals and modern humans shared the same landscapes and perhaps even the same communities, and another in the history of science, where a fossil discovered more than a century ago continues to reshape our understanding of who we are. Even today, as new genetic studies and archaeological discoveries appear almost every year, the great Neanderthal from the rock shelter of Dordogne still stands at the center of the story. A silent witness to the final chapter of Neanderthal history, and one of the most important human fossils ever found. And with that tantalizing statement, we leave you to ponder the mysteries of our shared human history. Until next time, stay curious and stay questioning. Please subscribe, share and explore our channel's other videos. Thank you and take care.